The sunlight outside the dusty roadside bar was warm and golden, but inside, the air crackled with an ugly tension, one of those moments when everyone senses something is about to go horribly wrong, yet no one steps forward. And in the middle of it all stood a quiet waitress named Raya Kincaid, holding a tray that shook ever so slightly in her steady-looking hands. The harassers circling her, 3 men with whiskey-thick voices and empty hearts, had no clue that the woman they mocked had once stood under the bright lights of the world's biggest arenas, her fists raised in triumph, her name chanted by roaring crowds. They did not know she had been an MMA World Champion, feared for her precision, admired for her strength, and respected for her discipline. Today, she was merely a waitress in a small-town bar trying to rebuild a life no one knew she had lost. If you believe in kindness, strength, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Kindness Corner. Your support truly keeps stories like this alive. Raya had arrived in the quiet town of Windermere 7 months earlier, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and the weight of a life that had collapsed behind her. Fame had been beautiful, but fleeting, trust had been dangerous, and betrayed. A knee injury, a manager who stole her earnings, and a heartbreak that shattered her spirit had driven her away from the spotlight. She took a bus out of the city, changed her name, and chose a place where no one cared about who she used to be. She needed to breathe again, to learn how to exist without cameras and expectations, to remember what peace felt like. At Windermere's only roadside bar, the Red Lantern, she found a job, a routine, and moments of quiet humanity that slowly stitched pieces of her soul back together. The regulars liked her smile, the owner admired her work ethic, and the small-town customers appreciated her kindness. She liked this world where no one knew her past, where she wasn't the champion, just Raya. But peace always attracts shadows. The 3 men who walked in that day at noon were strangers, loud, sunburned, restless. They tossed their jackets on a table and began drinking quickly, laughing in a way that didn't come from joy but from an emptiness they were desperate to hide. Raya served them with the same patience she offered everyone, hoping they would drink, eat, and leave quietly. Yet trouble has a way of feeding on silence. By the time she returned with their second round, the men's laughter had sharpened like knives. She felt the shift in the air, she had sensed it 1,000 times during her career, right before a fight began. Raya tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself this wasn't a cage. This wasn't an arena. These weren't opponents. They were simply unhappy men who didn't know how to live without hurting others. She placed their drinks down carefully, but one of the men kicked the leg of her tray, knocking a glass to the floor. It shattered in a spray of amber and shards. The bar fell silent. The man smirked. "Oops. Must have slipped from your soft little hands." Raya simply bent down to clean it. She always avoided conflict. She had fought too much in her life. She wanted peace now, not another battle to survive. But the man wasn't done. Before she could rise, he stepped closer, letting his beer-stale breath hit her face. "Slow down, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Pretty things break fast." The other 2 laughed, the low, cruel echo bouncing off the old wooden walls. From the corner, Marlon, the elderly cook who'd worked there for 30 years, started to step forward, but Raya subtly shook her head. She didn't want him involved. He was old, kind, and fragile. This wasn't his fight. She stood up, gave the men a courteous, controlled smile, and turned to leave, but one grabbed her wrist. The bar gasped as Raya froze in place. Her heart thundered the way it used to right before a championship match, when every breath carried the power of choice. She reminded herself she didn't want violence. She wanted normalcy. But her body, trained for years under pressure, instinctively prepared for whatever came next. The man's fingers dug into her skin. "Where you running off to? We were just getting to know you." Raya didn't flinch, but she felt that old wildfire of adrenaline flicker inside her. She noticed his stance, the sloppy angle of his shoulders, the weakness in his grip. Her brain instantly mapped out the physics of escape. She hated that part of herself, how automatic it was. How violence lived in her muscles even when her heart no longer wanted it. "Please let go," she said calmly. "I'm working." He squeezed harder. "Or what?" he sneered. Raya gently pulled her wrist back, breaking the grip with minimal force, using leverage rather than strength. He stumbled slightly, surprised. She stepped back, keeping her breathing steady. She didn't want to escalate anything. She didn't want to be that person again. But humiliation is gasoline to insecure men. The man shoved his chair back and lunged, grabbing her arm harshly, too harshly. This time, he didn't let go. The owner, Carmen, shouted from behind the bar, "Leave her alone or get out." But the man didn't listen. His anger had taken over. That's when the switch inside Raya flipped, not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of instinct and self-protection. It was the quiet awakening of a warrior she'd tried to bury. The crowd didn't know what they were witnessing, the precision in her breath, the balance in her stance, the calm that fell over her expression. The moment right before a storm. The man tightened his grip. Raya moved. In one fluid, controlled motion, she twisted her body, used his own weight against him, and sent him stumbling forward with a harmless but unmistakably skillful sweep. He didn't fall badly, she made sure of that. But he hit the ground hard enough to rattle his pride. His friends stood, shocked. "What the, how'd she?" one muttered. But none of them backed down. Pride mixed with alcohol could turn rational men into reckless ones. All three stepped toward her now, faces red with anger, voices slurring threats, fists clenching. Raya felt her chest tighten. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to hurt anyone. But she saw the way their eyes had changed. They weren't thinking, they weren't listening. They were spiraling into the kind of violence she had survived her whole life. So she inhaled deeply and readied herself, not for victory, but for protection. The first man swung clumsily at her. She sidestepped with effortless grace, guiding his momentum past her. He stumbled into a table. The second raised his hand threateningly, but she intercepted gently, twisting just enough to make him drop the idea of using it again. The third attempted a grab, but she evaded, pivoted, and lightly pushed him back with a palm strike to his chest, measured, controlled, enough to warn him but not harm him. The entire bar stared in disbelief as the three drunken men, moments earlier so sure of their power, stumbled around her as though caught in a dance they didn't understand. Raya didn't throw a single punch. She didn't strike to hurt. She simply defended with the grace of someone who knew exactly how to control a storm. Finally, the men collapsed onto chairs and the floor, winded and humiliated. Carmen called the sheriff, who arrived minutes later and escorted the men out as they muttered protests and empty threats. The bar slowly exhaled, the tension lifting like fog in sunlight. When the sheriff left, several customers approached Raya with wide eyes. "Where'd you learn to move like that? Are you military? Were you a cop?" Raya shook her head, suddenly feeling small, exposed. "I used to fight professionally," she admitted softly. "Like boxing?" someone asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." But Carmen had Googled her name after hearing the sheriff ask for her ID. She approached Raya quietly, her eyes full of awe and understanding. "You were a world champion," she whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Raya felt her throat tighten. The memories flooded in, arenas, cameras, betrayals, the pressure to be perfect, the loneliness that fame had carved into her bones. "Because I didn't want to be her anymore," Raya said. "I just wanted to be normal." Marlon put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Raya, strength isn't something you have to hide. What you did today wasn't fighting. It was protecting yourself. There's nothing shameful about that." For the first time in years, she felt her armor crack, not the kind she wore in the cage, but the emotional one she'd wrapped around her heart. She had been running not from the world, but from herself, from the belief that her strength only brought destruction. But today she saw that strength could bring safety too. In the days that followed, the town treated her no differently, except for an added layer of admiration that felt unexpectedly warm, not suffocating. Kids asked for self-defense lessons, and neighbors thanked her for standing up for herself. Carmen insisted on giving her a raise. And for the first time in a long while, Raya felt proud without feeling exposed. She still avoided talking about her past too much, but she slowly allowed herself to believe she hadn't lost everything. She had simply entered a new chapter, one where she could choose peace without erasing the fighter inside her. Sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting who you were, it comes from learning how to carry that version of yourself with gentleness. And as Raya walked home one bright afternoon, sunlight warm on her shoulders, she realized she no longer felt like she was hiding. She felt like she was living. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support truly helps these stories reach others who need a little hope.